Hello, you're watching Demo to IP, the Epitomy training series that jumpstarts your HD Demo system and IP telephony solution. This is Session 4, Remote Phones. Remote phones allow workers to be anywhere and utilize the power of the PBX. Typically, this might be thought of as being in a home. Home offices are probably the single biggest application for remote phones, but remote phones might also be deployed on a cell phone, allowing the user to utilize the PBX on the way home. So what makes an extension a remote phone? It's a PBX extension, same as in the office, and it's a SIP device, same as in the office. The difference is the point of interface. Where is it on the network? Remote phones are connected to the PBX via the WAN interface. This requires some specific setup steps that involve your router. The router is usually the point on the network through which traffic on the LAN, the local area network, that is intended for the WAN, or the public network, is passed to the WAN. So it is also typically the location of the firewall. A firewall is the barrier that keeps from the LAN any traffic on the WAN that is not desired. IP addressing is all about where devices are on the network. Certain number ranges have been set aside by the Internet Engineering Task Force as private IP addresses. The remote phones located in many possible locations will have a public IP associated to their point of origin on the WAN. In order to get a remote phone working, it must be allowed to access the PBX from the WAN. Since the remote phone finds the PBX using the PBX's public IP, it must include directions on how to traverse the LAN once it is allowed through the firewall. The Internet Engineering Task Force has detailed how this can be done using port identifiers. SIP connections have a default port number of 5060. Although there are ways to accommodate dynamically assigned IP addresses, we recommend a static IP address be assigned by the service provider at the WAN interface of the router. The remote phone uses this IP address and a port number to instruct the router where on the local area network it should be delivering the remote phone SIP packets. What's needed now is the direction of traffic. The router must be programmed as to how to use the port identifier. This is called network address translation, or port forwarding. There are many routers available on the market, so you must use routers that you are confident will perform this function well. NATing is a CPU-intensive operation that will require the router CPU and algorithm be capable of multiple NAT sessions. We have a list of routers that we have had good success using. The routers on our list can be used with third-party software that enhances the performance of the router. We like DDWRT, a free router software that can be loaded onto many commercially available routers. The router table must be built for two kinds of voice data traffic, SIP control and RTP or voice. From the remote telephone, only the SIP control is identified, since the PBX will define the RTP port to be used for the RTP traffic for this connection session. Notice that the port forwarding takes place only in the router at the location where the PBX is located. Now we're going to have a look at the programming in DDWRT routers. Open your browser and navigate to the router. Once the credentials are input and you have access to the router, you can find where NATing or port forwarding is programmed. In our router, we have already programmed SSH access, which is required for Epitomy technical support. Port 22 is directed or forwarded to the PBX IP address. For SIP control, we need to add a forwarding rule for port 5060. The protocol is TCP. When programming single port forwarding rules, you can assign an internal port designation. In this case, it's just a mirror of the external port designation of 5060. So 5060 is forwarded to the IP address of the PBX with a port 5060 designation. Be sure to enable the rule. For SIP RTP traffic, we need to input a port range. The range required is 10,000 to 20,000. The PBX randomly assigns the actual port number that will be used for this range for each SIP session. This is a security measure to conceal the ports used for each connection. The router then directs all traffic on these ports to the PBX where it can be authenticated or terminated. The programming must be saved and settings applied. In the PBX, the easiest way to set up a remote phone is to have the basics in place. So be sure to have the external IP address programmed in the external IP data field under PBX Setup SIP. We're going to make our 620 the remote phone, so we've removed the previous programming and defaulted the telephone. In the creation process, input the device type as 620 and the MAC address of the telephone, then click Create. You should see the familiar success indication. Now go back to the extension list and find the new extension. Open PBX settings for the extension we just created and navigate to the Advanced tab. Change the location of the device to WAN, since that is how it will interface the PBX. Click Save Changes. Navigate to Edit Phone Settings for the new extension. Under the SIP Network Settings tab, change SIP location to WAN. Then set DTMF mode to RFC 2833, time server to Use PBX time server, and change the configuration updates from TFTP to HTTP. The port for configuration updates can remain at 80 unless you've identified it differently in your router port forwarding. Notice the SIP location IP address for the telephone is the LAN IP address of the PBX. Save these changes and then navigate back to Edit Phone Settings to see that the SIP location is now pointed toward the external or WAN IP address of the router. When the telephone is moved to the remote location, you can view it locally. When powered up, it should be registered to the PBX, as ours is. To find the IP address of the phone, go to the telephone menu, press Menu, then navigate to View Settings and press OK, then to Network and press OK. Our telephone is configured on our network at IP address 192.168.2.142. Open a browser at this site and navigate to the phone. Under SIP Account, Account 1, we see the settings that have been assigned and now functional. The SIP server is the WAN IP address of the router at the PBX location. The outbound proxy is also the WAN IP address. If you have trouble with your remote phone, it will be associated to the router at the PBX location. It might be port forwarding or the router not being able to handle NAT sessions. There are many other scenarios that become very complex when using sophisticated routers and firewalls. ALGs, or application layer gateways, and other traffic filtering are often at fault without being readily noticeable. For the purpose of aiding you in troubleshooting, we're going to show you how to register one of your unused SIP accounts to the IPitomy Demo system to assist you in determining the cause of any issue you may encounter. First, navigate to demo.ipitomy.com/IPPBX. This system is available for you to use as practice and for demonstrations. The login credentials are default. We're going to set up an extension on the IPitomy Demo system and activate the extension on the remote phone. Using the same practices that we've used before, we add an extension to the IPitomy Demo system. This time, it's 9877. After the extension is created, we're going to edit PBX settings for the extension and set the location to WAN. Since your telephone is not located on the same network as the PBX, we cannot provision it as we have in the past, so changing the phone settings under Edit Phone Settings is not necessary. Instead, go back into the Edit PBX Settings area to Advanced. Find the SIP password and use the Windows Copy function to copy the password. Now navigate to the phone. The telephone currently has the HD Demo System extension 620. We can see this account registration and line allocation. There are currently 4 lines assigned to your HD Demo system. Change that to 3 so that we have a button position available for the IPitomy Demo System line. Now go to SIP Accounts, Account 2. Enable it and assign the extension number 9877 to Display Name, Username, Account Name, and Label. Now go to the password field and paste in the password copied from demo.ipitomy.com. Now go down to Call, Amount of Line Account Used, and change this to 1. It will then show up on the line button that we vacated previously. As a side note, if this telephone will be transported between the home office and the main office, the secondary server and second box under Outbound Proxy Server can be programmed for the LAN IP address of the PBX. This way it will register to the PBX on the office LAN if connected there, or register to the PBX on the home LAN via the office WAN interface. In addition, these secondary server data fields might also be designations for redundancy servers when the telephone installation application requires failover functionality. Now when we look at the telephone, we see our HD Demo system extension 620 is registered on the first 3 line appearances, and the IPitomy Demo system extension 9877 is registered on the 4th line appearance. Your remote phone is now functional on 2 IPitomy PBXs.